humans will eat almost anything on this planet. Insects, whale blubber, fermented shark, the lining of a cow's stomach, none of it is off the table somewhere, except one entire category of meat that almost nobody touches: the flesh of predators. In January of 1913, a Swiss ski champion named Xavier Mertz was dying on the Antarctic ice. He and expedition leader Douglas Mawson had lost most of their food supplies down a crevasse, along with a teammate. Weeks of carefully rationed food gone in seconds, along with a full sledge of gear. What was left were their sled dogs, so they ate the dogs, organs, and all. Mertz got sicker by the day. His skin turned yellow. Within about a week, he was gone. For decades, everyone assumed it was simple: cold, exhaustion, starvation, take your pick. We'll get back to what actually killed him, because the real answer was sitting in one specific organ, and it explains a lot more than one man's death. Here's the pattern hiding behind that grim footnote of polar history. Across nearly every culture on Earth, in nearly every era, humans have quietly avoided eating carnivores. Cows, yes. Pigs, yes. Rabbits, deer, chickens, fish by the billion. Lions, wolves, eagles, bears. Barely ever, and almost never on purpose. Even in cultures that hunted wolves and big cats constantly, for fur, for safety, for sport, eating the meat itself stayed rare. Anthropologists who study hunter-gatherer diets have a name for the logic behind this: the prey choice model. It ranks animals by how many calories you get back for the risk and effort of catching them. A slow, fat-heavy grazer scores high. A lean, fast animal with teeth of its own scores low. Since you burn more energy chasing it, risk more getting hurt by it, and end up with less usable meat once the fight's over. It's the same logic that keeps you from spending 20 minutes cracking open a coconut when there's a bowl of grapes sitting right next to it. Researchers working with groups like the Hadza in Tanzania have documented this directly. Big carnivores show up in the diet far less than raw abundance would predict, and it isn't for lack of trying. The case against predator meat piles up fast from there. Bears carry trichinosis, so do walruses, so do wild boar, which, fine, aren't technically apex predators, but the pattern holds anyway. Ask a chef who's actually cooked mountain lion for a magazine feature, and you'll get a wince before you get a description. Musky, sour, faintly reminiscent of whatever unfortunate animal it last had for dinner. Stack up the risk, the parasites, and the flavor, and "we don't eat predators because it's a bad deal" starts to look like a complete answer. Except that answer might be too clean. If this were purely a numbers game, every culture should treat every predator the same way. For the same reasons, they don't. Some societies eat bear regularly, a few historically ate lion. Plenty of cultures happily eat fish that are, biologically speaking, apex predators of their own ecosystem. Bluefin tuna sits at the top of the open ocean food chain and shows up on menus everywhere without a second thought. Maybe the calorie math isn't the whole story. The French anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss looked at food taboos and landed somewhere else entirely. He argued certain animals aren't avoided because they're dangerous to eat. They're avoided because of what they represent. A predator sits at the top of its world the same way we sit at the top of ours. Eating one starts to feel less like a meal and more like an uncomfortably close cousin of cannibalism. His own phrase for taboos like this, loosely translated, was that some foods are less good to eat than they are good to think. The rule lives in the symbolism, not the stomach. So which is it, biology or symbolism? Almost certainly both, tangled together so tightly you can't fully pull them apart. And here's the mechanism doing a lot of the biological heavy lifting. Ecologists call it biomagnification. Picture it like a rumor getting more exaggerated every time it's repeated. Except instead of a rumor, it's a toxin. And instead of gossip, it's your liver. A rabbit only carries whatever chemicals were in the plants it ate. A wolf that's eaten hundreds of rabbits over its life carries a concentrated version of all of theirs, stacked on top of its own. Which brings us back to vitamin A and to Mertz. Your body needs a tiny daily dose of it. A predator's liver, sitting at the top of that same concentrating chain, can hold thousands of times that amount because predators eat animals that already stockpiled their own share of it. Eat enough of that liver in one sitting, and you're not getting a nutrient. You're getting a toxic dose, all at once, faster than your body has any plan for handling it. A single serving of polar bear liver can pack in something like years' worth of your recommended vitamin A intake. An entire pharmacy shelf of supplements swallowed in one sitting. Except your liver doesn't get years to process it, it gets one afternoon. Science has a real limit here, though. It can explain the vitamin A, it can explain the parasites, the toxin math, the taste. What it genuinely struggles to explain is why disgust toward predator meat runs so much deeper, in so many places, than "this might poison me." Disgust is a strange, stubborn emotion. It doesn't wait for evidence, and it doesn't reliably leave once the evidence changes. Marvin Harris, an anthropologist who spent much of his career defending the practical side of this argument, put something close to a rebuttal in his book, Good to Eat. His basic claim: most food rules that look irrational from the outside hide a genuine cost-benefit logic once you dig into the specific ecology of whoever's actually following them. He wasn't saying every taboo makes sense in the moment somebody's obeying it. He was saying most of them started as a useful shortcut that simply outlived the reasoning behind it. There's something almost optimistic in that. A huge share of the food rules that look like pure superstition might actually be fossilized good decisions, made by people with no lab equipment, but with several thousand years of watching very closely what happened to whoever ignored the rule. Back to Mertz, then, and the liver that likely killed him. He wasn't the first person to find this out the hard way, and he wouldn't be the last. Centuries earlier, in 1596, sailors on a Dutch expedition led by Willem Barents ate polar bear liver and became violently ill within hours, splitting headaches, and within days, their skin peeling off in sheets. Word apparently traveled, sailor to sailor, long before anyone wrote it into a medical journal. By the time later generations of Arctic hunters were passing down survival knowledge, "never eat the liver" had become one of the very first rules anyone learned about the far north, right up there with "don't lick the metal." Nobody needed a laboratory for that one. Mertz, dying in a tent on the far side of the world 3 centuries later, effectively rediscovered the same lesson, at a much higher cost. Zoom out far enough, and this stops being a story about one unlucky explorer. It's a story about exactly where we draw the line between us and everything we're willing to put in our mouths. We draw that line constantly, mostly without noticing it, comfortable with a cow, squeamish about a dog, and for reasons buried somewhere between chemistry and gut instinct, almost universally squeamish about a wolf. Try to explain the difference, and most people just shrug because nobody actually taught them the rule. They just absorbed it, the way you absorb which fork to use without ever reading a manual. That says something a little uncomfortable about the rest of us, honestly. Ask most people why they'd never eat bear or lion, and you'll get "that's just wrong" or "that seems dangerous," usually without much thought behind it. Turns out both answers are right, for reasons that go back a lot further than any of us individually bothered to ask, which is a little humbling, since most of us like to think our food choices are personal and deliberate, when a solid chunk of them were actually settled by people who never got the chance to explain themselves several thousand years ago. There's a coda to the ice worth knowing. Mawson survived. He made it back to base camp alone, badly frostbitten, having also eaten dog liver during the same ordeal, just less of it than Mertz did. Less liver, as it turns out, was very nearly the entire difference between a legendary survival story and an unmarked grave in the snow. Next time somebody tells you humans will eat anything, think about what that liver did to Xavier Mertz, what it did to Willem Barents' sailors 3 centuries earlier, and what it very nearly didn't do to Douglas Mawson. Almost anything, it turns out, has always come with an asterisk. Predators were it.